Hey, a couple of weeks ago, I asked everybody to leave what their estimated clubhead speed currently was down in the comments. But unfortunately, clubhead speed does not directly equate to distance. So right after this, let's take a look at how far you should be hitting the ball based on your clubhead speed. So for the most part, the pros you see playing on TV pretty much get about every yard out of their clubhead speed as possible. Give or take a few, depending a little bit on strategy. But the average golfer at home is very poor when it comes to turning clubhead speed into actual distance. Now, the average male golfer swings at around 91 or 92 miles an hour, according to Arcos, the little reporting system where you have the little chip on your club and it tracks all your shots and scores for you. However, they also found that the average drive was less than 220 yards for those 91 or 92 miles an hour, which is extremely poor when it comes to distance efficiency. Now let's take a look at the chart. I'm going to post the chart that TrackMan publishes for the optimal distances for each speed. Now we'll start with the slower of the two charts, starting at about 75 miles an hour, but I know it's 70 miles an hour because I know there's going to be a couple people out there watching, maybe a couple older guys, a couple of gals that swing around 70 miles an hour. Now in all my experience with students on the TrackMan, I found that about the most you can hit the ball at 70 miles an hour is about 180 yards. 175 is pretty good, but max out fully is about 180 yards. So if you're not hitting the ball that far on your best hit, or your average is well short of that, a couple things I would do with these slower speeds. Number one, make sure you have enough loft on your club head. For 70 miles an hour, I recommend somewhere between 13 and 15 degrees of loft on your driver. Now moving up to 75 miles an hour, you can see the numbers on the chart. I've got the maximums here highlighted, but I'm also going to tell you in my years of experience working with TrackMan and actual real life golfers, what I found to be the outer limits on distance and why golfers are not quite getting there. So the slower speeds, in addition to having enough loft, you're also going to need to check and make sure you're hitting the sweet spot or not. So golfers in that range at the slower clubhead speeds, they tend to be less skilled because we know that lower handicap golfers tend to swing faster. So the more skill you have, generally the faster you swing the club. But at lower speeds, a lot of golfers that I've seen, they also hit the ball very short because they miss the sweet spot quite severely. But no one at that speed generally that I've worked with can place where exactly they hit the ball. They don't know for sure. So make sure you have enough loft on your driver, and make sure you have a good can of foot powder spray that you can spray the face with and identify where you're mishitting the ball so you can start to equate a feel for the miss with where it is on the club face. You can also determine if you're missing in a trend. Let's say all your hits are from center to low heel, or are you just missing it randomly all over the face? So that's one thing you really need to identify in order to get more distance efficiency. Now moving up to 80 miles an hour, you can see what the chart says. And in my experience, anything over 200 yards is pretty darn good. If you could average 200 yards at 80 miles an hour, you're doing great. You're ahead of the game, getting very distance efficient. I've seen golfers poke it as far as, 210, 212 yards at 80 miles an hour. These are golfers that had their drivers perfectly fit to them, so the ball flight was efficient, and they struck it right in the middle for a perfect smash factor score of 1.50. Now moving up to 85 miles an hour, I found these golfers can max out somewhere in the range of 225 to 228 yards. At this range, you're probably looking at a driver loft of somewhere between 10.5 and 12 degrees. So you still need quite a bit of loft to get it airborne, and got to hit it in the sweet spot reasonably close. Moving up to 90 miles an hour, this is where I know a lot of you watching are going to be. A lot of you report only hitting drives of about 220 yards, but at 90 miles an hour, I find that someone who's really well fit and hits the ball square is able to get the ball out over 250, occasionally to 255 yards. Now, if you're just about a high single digit or maybe a 12 handicap and you swing around 90 miles an hour, you're not going to hit the ball sweet enough every single time with perfect trajectory to get that 250 to 255. It's more likely that you're going to hit your good drives 240. If you could average 240 at 90 miles an hour, you're ahead of the game. You're being very efficient. Just remember, your best pops should be over 250. Moving up to 95. Now we're starting to get down in the range where 10.5 is starting to maybe be a little bit too high of loft in a lot of brands. Hopefully you have an adjustable driver that you can start to turn it down 10 degrees, 9.5 degrees at this point, depending on your angle of attack. But at 95 miles an hour, I'd expect to see you pop for 270 yards on your best drive. And if you could average about 260 yards off the tee at 95 miles an hour, you're doing great. At 100 miles an hour, now we're definitely talking about needing a driver that's, say, somewhere between 9 and 10 degrees in most brands, and occasionally you might find you need an 8.5 given your angle of attack. And I would expect to see you eclipse 280 yards off the tee on your best hits, maybe even 285 on a perfect hit. But if you can average 270 yards at this point out of 100 miles an hour, you're doing great. Now, everywhere beyond the next 5 mile an hour jumps, you can add 15 yards pretty routinely onto everything you're doing. So 105 miles an hour, I'd expect you to top out at 295. 110 miles an hour, I'd expect you to top out at maybe 310. Although I know the chart here at 110 is further, but you're really going to need to get into the weeds with your analysis, your club fitting, your striking, your mechanics, if you're going to max everything out to the TrackMan chart. Now, that drive I hit in the intro was just a shade under 113 miles an hour, got to about 169 ball speed, and I was able to hit the ball 327 yards. Now you can see here, you can interpolate between 110 and 115 on the chart, and you see, well, I'm pretty darn close to maxed out on the distance on that last drive. And finally, at 120 miles an hour, you can see theoretically it's possible to eclipse 350 yards on occasion, although that's definitely not going to be anyone's average swinging that fast. But if you could average 330, 335, 340 at that speed, you're way ahead of the game, because there's a lot of people who are inefficient out there swinging that fast, swinging 120 that only hit the ball 320 yards. At this point, a lot of it comes down to angle of attack and then control of the launch and spin rates. By the time you reach 110 miles an hour or more, if you have a reasonable amount of angle of attack upwards at the moment of strike, it starts to be hard to fit you with an off-the-rack club. You're looking for something more in the 7.5 to 9 degree range now. So if you could find a 9.5 or a 9 degree driver and turn it all the way down 1.5 degrees, so where it's more in the 8 range or even lower, and at 120, that might not even be enough. You're going to start having to get into some specialty boutique lofts, 6 degree, 7 degree drivers. So we know that the average golfer is losing about 35 yards per drive just due to efficiency. Now, this could be, again, a poor angle of attack, poorly fitting driver, or just severe mishits all around the face. So if you're going to pick up that extra 35 yards without having to attempt to swing any faster, then you're going to want to try to narrow down where is it that you are losing your yardage. Identify that first, and then we can address it, because most people who are losing 35, 40 yards and they don't even know that it's missing. But first of all, now that you know that it's missing, how much yardage you're missing based on the optimals. Now you've got to identify where it's coming from. So down in the comments below, for this week's free video swing analysis, I want you to tell me how many yards you think you're missing off the optimals in the TrackMan chart, and which category do you think is causing you to lose the most? Is it because you're hitting down instead of up? Is it because you're mishitting the sweet spot? Or maybe it's because you don't have the right shaft, the right driver loft, and you're getting either too high and spinny or too low and flat of a ball flight. I will pick one lucky winner at random and you will win a free video swing analysis. All right, I'm going to get back to working on maxing out my driver distance for the amount of speed that I'm putting in. I thank you again so much for watching and supporting my channel. I'm Steve, and as usual, I'll either see you in the next video or I'll see you longer and straighter down the fairway. Everybody take good care.